Welcome to the Hidden Bookcase. Come in, have a seat, get comfy.
It's just next to the sliding library ladder and right below the shelf titled Historical Fantasy.
Pick a book, your favourite book. That's the one that opens this room. Inside you'll find a warm fire, a loving cat, and a wide skylight to the stars.
And a really towering TBR pile.
I'm Morgan, I use they them pronouns, and I am the gender-fluid cryptid performing magic in the woods near your house.
I'm Soren, I use he him pronouns, and I'm a wisp leading you out of the trees.
We've been friends for 10 years and are always swapping books.
But despite having the same taste in books, we never get round to reading each other's recommendations. It's always just another book on the pile.
It's a seriously big pile now. It might crush me in my sleep. So, each month we're going to force each other to read a book.
The new reader will give a blind summary of the book, we'll both go away and read it, and then we'll return to chat about it.
So this week, let's get to talking about...
Sistersong by Lucy Holland. So Morgan, how did you find out about Sistersong?
So I first discovered Sistersong pretty soon after it came out, like in the first few weeks after it came out, because the author is local to where I live and she actually works in Waterstones. So all of the copies were signed in my local Waterstones. And when I was sort of talking to one of the staff, they were like, "Oh yeah, have you read Lucy's new book yet?" And I was like, "Who's Lucy?" And they were like, "Oh, Lucy's one of our staff. She just wrote a book. It's historical fantasy." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, okay, I will absolutely buy that." So bought it. And rarely for me, read it almost as soon as I bought it. Usually it's 5 years later. I'm like, "Oh, I bought that book 5 years ago. Maybe I'll check it out, see if it's worth anything," despite the fact that I have bought the entire series. Read it, loved it. It was on my top 10 books for last year.
And what is Sistersong about?
It's a great question. It is about 3 siblings in historical Britain, under siege by the Saxons. You know, Christianity's encroaching, magic is fading from the land, and their father is the king and is sort of giving up on magic in exchange for Christianity. It's based on the Trois Sisters, which is a old English folk ballad, through the 2 sisters, Reva and Sina, and their other sibling, who I'm going to call Constantine for this. Spoilers, but Constantine, as he comes to terms with the fact that he's a trans man. And it's just, I just love it so much. Like, I'm not a historical fantasy person at all, but I just enjoyed it so much. You know, the vibes, the whole narrative. I was obsessed. Shall we listen to your blind react?
Once again, I have no memory of what I said.
I'm excited to listen.
So, Sistersong by Lucy Holland. It's obviously historical fantasy because that's the theme for this month, but I have no idea when it's set. I'm getting kind of a Celtic vibe from the cover, but I'm not sure if I'm right. That could be entirely wrong. It's a guess. I'm also a stab in the dark that maybe of the siblings, one of them has fire powers and one of them has water powers, in that their hair looks kind of like fire and water on the cover, but I have no idea if I'm correct in that. That's a complete stab in the dark. So, other than that, all I know is that one of the siblings is trans, and that is my entire basic knowledge about Sistersong, so I can't wait to go into it. I thought that was alright. I was right about the powers, kind of, not really.
Not really. I do love that observation though, like the water and fire. I spent so long when I first read this trying to figure out who was who.
Same, I had the exact same thing. I was like, who? And I just kept flipping between. I was like, no, that's obviously X.
Yeah. The one on the left is definitely Sina, and the one on the right is definitely Reva.
Is it though? Because also Sina has fire powers.
Yeah, but in the original ballad, the sister who dies is described as like blonde and like fair, and the other sister is described as dark-haired. And they're like, I definitely think that the one on the left is like lighter shades.
That's true.
And the one on the right is dark shades. And also she looks a lot more serious and dour. And also, I don't know how Reva would be involved in water, whereas like Sina, spoilers, Sina dies in the water.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was supposed to be water, if it was sort of supposed to allude to like her healing and also possibly whatever force power she used to like push if that happened, which is contentious.
No, I'm gonna say it goes Sina, Constantine, Reva.
Yeah. I mean, for a while I thought it was Constantine as well, because he does this little fire dance situation. And I was like, that's got to be Constantine then.
Huh?
And also, because of the hair being lifted up, it seems shorter. So I was like, maybe that's going to be indicative of a haircut at some point, which does happen. But
This is true. This is true. Yeah. Also, before we go any further, shout out to the author, Lucy Holland, because I asked her for a pronunciation guide on Twitter yesterday, and she very kindly gave us all of them, and I have been pronouncing so many of them so wrong.
yes, thank you so much for that, because I was worried about that. And then Morgan was like, I've done research. And I was like, they'll have looked up a pronunciation guide. And then apparently there wasn't one.
Most of them are logical. It's just I don't trust my own grasp of the English language
That's
to be
understandable.
correct. And some of them, it was. Sina, I did not have. I was calling her Sin or Sine.
Yeah, I was calling her Sine as well.
But now we know. Soren, talk to me about the writing style.
I love the writing style. Like, it very much immediately grabbed me. The difference between the three siblings' narrative voices is really strong. You could tell whose point of view you were reading, even if you like had to stop and then come back. There was no like flipping to the beginning of the chapter to peek at the name to try and figure out who was talking. It was immediately obvious because they all sounded so different, and I really appreciated that.
Yeah, I really liked how you could feel their ages as well in
Yes.
how they were written, like especially Sina. Like,
Yes.
it's very hard to write a compelling younger character who is realistically selfish. But Sina was very realistic, and her progression throughout the story was, on a second read, I was like, Sina was my favorite character on the second read.
Yeah, she was fantastic. I was really impressed in the way that Holland folded in her less likable characteristics. I think there's that thing of like, if you're writing a younger character, you kind of want to make them, especially if you're writing a tragic younger character, you want to make them as good and adorable and kind as possible. Whereas, yeah, she's pretty selfish. She's pretty self-absorbed and quite malicious at times, honestly. But she's still very believable and actually quite likable.
When I first read it, I went through it quite fast. I do think it was quite slow. I think the first half could have been a lot shorter, because the first half felt a bit like scene setting. Like, personally, I enjoyed the scene setting on the first go round because I very much needed to be like thrown into the world, and I was, and it was built up. And the second time round, it felt quite slow, and it took me a lot longer to read. The first time round, I didn't know that there was a trans character in this book.
Oh, right, that's interesting.
I had no idea going in. On my reread, I was like, wow, from page 1, Constantine is so trans. How did I miss this? But when I first read it, I think I'm just so used to like the tomboy female character
Yeah.
vibe that every time Constantine was like, oh, I wish they'd see me differently. I wish I could wear boys' clothes. I was like, okay, a tomboy character. And it's not until Maury refers to him as boy that I went, hang on, are we getting a trans narrative in this book? And then I was just blue screening from there on out, like reading it like, oh my god, trans character, because I haven't read enough trans characters.
That's interesting, yeah, because I almost wish I didn't know going in. I wonder at what point I sort of would have realised, because like, given that I knew that somebody would be trans, as soon as Constantine like spoke, I was like, well, it's obviously you. It was pretty obvious that it was him. But I think it would have been interesting to see it in a different way, because he also has the whole wanting to be a warrior and wanting to be respected and stuff, and it could easily be read just as that, just like a general chafing against the sexism, basically. I think she does a good job with separating that from the gender thing. He's not only a man because he wants to fight and stuff. That's not the impression that you get from him.
Yeah, I mean, because you have the parallel of Gwen being like, yes,
Yes.
I've trained with a knife, but she's still very distinctly not tomboyized or anything like that. She's still distinctly a woman. So Constantine's journey is very clearly made separate to that, which I really, really love.
Yeah, and I think also to some extent, Riva and Sina's experiences of sexism and oppression are still there. It's not like a X leads to Y situation. They're also chafing against the restraints, they're just doing it in a different way. But it's interesting that you say that it was a little slow on a second read, because obviously this was my first read, but I felt very absorbed by the world, which I was really enjoying. Honestly, it's been a really long time since I read something that felt very other. Like, I've been reading a lot of Victorian era historical fantasy and urban fantasy, and that's all fine, and I love all that, but it was nice to have something that was like, here's something really different, like that escapist.
I think I do need to get into more historical fantasy, because I really like, Celtic, Norse, Anglo-Saxon. I love that. And as a history vibe, like I've studied a little bit of it in my classics classes, but reading about it from this point of view was just so different. Yeah, let's move on to characters. This nice segue into characters. Gildas's arc. Gildas remains one of my favorite characters in this book because he's so interesting. Because he truly is like an exploration of how faith can be used as a tool and a weapon of control, and how like even he is a victim of the system, and how he has this power and goes, oh, it must be from God, even though it's from the land, and how he uses that gains to perpetuate the system. I love him. That plot twist where it turns out that he's actually a magician, it just lives in my head rent free at all times.
I did like that they like made a point of saying that he was actually kind of walking the walk as well. Like he was out there helping like the poor and stuff, while the protagonists are kind of just messing around in in the castle. In comparison to everyone else, they've got like double the rations and they've got more comfortable sleeping spaces and things.
But like Gildas is fully out here giving his rations to other people and like shoring up their homes and like giving them something to believe in. Christianity is at fault for much of the narrative, but it is ultimately King Cador's fault for abandoning the land and choosing Christianity, because he's also abandoning his people. Like we see that he is not necessarily deliberately ignoring the struggles of the poor in his kingdom, but he's definitely aware of it and doesn't change it. Whereas Gildas is out here like, yes, he's the perpetrator of the new religion, but he is also, he's doing what he said he would do on the tin, and he fully believes in his mission. Who's your favourite character, Soren?
Maury / Murdin, which I hope I'm saying correct. Gender fluid / bigender icon.
Truly.
Technically 2 characters, maybe that's why I'm like, oh, you're like 2 different archetypes of mental. That's really fun. You get to be both at the same time, just depending on your mood. Just very cool.
Yeah, I love them so much. Getting to have not 1, but 2 non-cis characters was so refreshing. And having the mentor character be that person, so refreshing. And the way the magic system works of allowing you to be perceived as whatever gender you want purely by the vibes you give out.
That's very cool.
Incredible aesthetics.
And I also found that interesting from a point of view of that little scene where, I guess it's Maury actually, is teaching Constantine to like stand up straight, whereas he's been doing the classic trans man hunch for his whole childhood. I was like, that's interesting because that's one that I see all the time, like in modern passing tips of like, yes, you don't feel comfortable standing up straight, but you need to do it because it will give you the height and the confidence, and it's far more important, and it is what people will notice a lot more. So I thought that was like a fun sort of tie-in to real life, because I was like, yeah, it actually doesn't, it's not necessarily about how you're looking. A lot of passing is in how you are acting.
It's why I think the romance between Constantine and Gwen is so successful, is because she first meets him as Constantine, and that allows her to more easily bypass what other people have assumed, because she starts out from a different basis than other people. Also, shout out to Cena for being the first person to just immediately switch and be like, oh, I get it. My bad. And just moving on, like silently, without even Constantine knowing.
He didn't even have to come out to her.
Cena says, I always knew you were different. And Constantine freezes and says, how does that make you feel? And she says, I don't know yet, but I'm getting used to the idea. And then Constantine says, is it so hard to see me as a brother instead of a sister? And Cena says, no, it isn't. So just such a simple, and we're moving on. I really enjoy how, at least from the main characters, we kind of sidestep a lot of the transphobia. All of the king's men are a bit more iffy about it, but it's never, there's no focus on the transphobia. It's very much like, there are these people who are saying these things, we don't have time for them, we're moving on. And most of the men respect him fast because he's proven himself in battle.
Yeah.
And shown his power as a king.
The fact that it's not a coming out narrative, it's part of Constantine's narrative, but it's not the focus of his narrative. He's busy trying to prevent an invasion and figure out how magic works. That it is exactly, it's that thing of like, we don't have time for this.
We should probably talk about Tristan.
I was going to say that. I think he's well written. I will say that I was immediately like, this man is a Saxon.
Literally, the fact that there's that one line where Constantine is like, oh, does he have no magic under his feet because he's an outsider? Hang on, but Myrddin and Gildas are both outsiders, and they have magic under their feet. And Myrddin just kind of goes, yeah, interesting. And then just moves on. It's like,
Wild.
surely he at least had figured it out. Like, why does it take so long for them to figure it out?
I feel like Oz maybe could have communicated it. I was a bit like, this man, like, the only thing he is mute. And sign language is very complex and difficult to learn. I say this as someone that's tried to learn it, but you can communicate extremely complex ideas with it. And given that Cena's been hanging out with him for months, I was a bit like, I don't understand why he hasn't been able to communicate. If he's now decided that he's on their side and doesn't want to be hanging around with Saxons.
I do understand, like, the fear of Tristan keeping him from saying anything.
That's fair, yeah.
Because I think it's not until he comes back from his trip, like, for 6 weeks, supposedly to Dyfed.
Yeah.
It's not until then that he tries to communicate it to Cena, and then, like, 3 days later, she's dead. If we'd seen a little bit more of the threatening side of Tristan towards Os, I think. Overall, I think through the points of views of the sisters and Constantine, you get very different points of view, because you've got Reva, who romanticizes him immediately, and you've got Cena, who romanticizes him and then sees through that. Both of them romanticizing him, but in very different ways and very, very different reasons. I really like Cena being like, I want because I think I should have. And I find Reva's narrative with Tristan very interesting from, like, a disabilities point of view. Because Tristan isn't saying anything that other people aren't also saying.
Yeah. It's
just that Reva is reading into the people she knows the pity that she expects to see there, which, you know, is an experience that I am well aware of. Whereas new people who meet you when you are already disabled and already in that place and then lift you up out of it, it's very easy to recontextualize them without that pity. The morality and the sort of the twisting of her logic in her head was really well done and really well handled.
Yeah, and I like that they didn't pull a Tristan was using her the entire time and actually hated her. It was not that at all. He was in fact genuinely attracted to her.
Like, he didn't ever plan to, like, fall in love with her, I think. Like, he was genuinely just like, I am a spy who is just gonna, like, see around the gates. Like, he didn't plan for Reva to stumble across him in the woods, half dead. I really liked the fact that, like, yeah, he's planning genocide and he is awful, but he genuinely does care about Reva. Like, he doesn't care about anybody else.
No.
But he cares about Reva. I like that Tristan does put his sword down and Constantine doesn't. I like that Constantine's like, I am going to end this, actually. Like, thanks, Reva, for giving me the opportunity to kill your fiancé. Let's go.
I felt like that was very interesting, because it was also, like, I didn't feel like Constantine wasn't in the right there. Like, this is the general of an invading army. Of course you're gonna kill this guy. Like, are you kidding? But it's interesting because it's also that thing of, like, the narrative and who tells it and how does it get twisted. And that's a moment where you can easily see how Constantine would be villainized later, because it's a truce that someone violates. That's, on paper, that seems like a terrible thing to do. But given the circumstances, it's like, hell yeah, stab him. Are you kidding me?
Most of the time I hate narratives that are like, oh my god, you can't kill your enemy because that makes you as bad as them. So, the enemy was trying to kill me. Let's move on.
They bloody started it.
It's like the same rhetoric as, like, you see marginalized communities versus the far right. It's like, why do we have to be the better man? Because, frankly, they started it and they wanted me dead. But if we're going to talk about Sistersong, we have to talk about the bone harp.
I wasn't expecting that at all. In fact, I wasn't expecting Cena to die in general. Like, when she initially fell in, I was like, she'll be fine.
I started the book when I was first reading it, had no idea. Then 100 pages in, I looked it up and was like, oh, the Trois Sisters, let me look that up. And went,
oh,
I'm sorry? And I had no idea. I was still in my denial about Constantine. I was still like, who's what? I had no idea what was going to happen. No idea how we were going to get from page 100 to Cena dead and Reva, like, over her body. And I didn't even know if it was going to be Cena and Reva.
Yeah.
I had no clue. But I just went, What? Even though it's the whole plot of the original ballad, I really like how it's sort of woven in at the end.
Yes.
Like, it's not the ultimate, most important thing.
Mm.
Though, like, the bone harp is incredibly vibey. Murden maybe took it a bit too far, and maybe incorrect decisions were made.
If any of my family are listening to this, if I die unexpectedly, don't make me into a harp.
I think I wouldn't mind being a harp, though.
Okay, you can make me into a harp for like the aesthetic or whatever, if that's what you
Yeah.
want to do. I personally would be a little bit put off by having to disassemble somebody's bones, but if you want to do it, then go for it. Don't trap my soul in the harp, though.
But she gets to travel the world at the end.
Does she?
Soren. She gets to
How
travel
is
the
she
world
experiencing
with
it?
Oz.
I wanted more points of view chapters from her after she was a harp.
Oh,
That's what I
absolutely.
wanted. I was like, please, can we hear from her again? And then we kind of don't.
They were incredibly vibey, incredibly f***ed up. Like, I would not want to be seen her. The vibes are immaculate. End result, not so cool. But it happens, and people who love her are complicit.
Holland is actually very good at swinging the pendulum into those dark scenes, though. The battles are all very intense, and that scene is obviously extremely eerie. And even like the scene where Kador dies, like it could easily be underwhelming. It's sort of like such a tropey thing, like the king dying and, you know, the heir having to like reconcile as this is happening, that like he's gonna have to take on the responsibility and stuff. But it was just, she makes them feel real, basically. They're like, they feel like people, and I'm like, oh no, this is a person in this situation, not just like the trope playing out in front of me.
So in the original ballad, there's a lot of different versions of the ballad, but Reva in a lot of them is far more complicit in the murder, like actively drowns her sister. I really liked how it was changed, so it's murky as to whether she actually pushed or not, you know, with her magic, or whether she just didn't help, or whether she was just frozen in the moment. So, you know, it's the grey morality of that was really well handled, I thought.
Is Constantine too unproblematic? Now that we've started discussing this, I'm wondering.
Well, this is the point that Lucy made to me. I just had my oh my god trans character blinkers on, and then Lucy went, he kind of has no flaws though, and I went,
yeah,
oh, you're kind of right a little bit.
He's amazing at magic and incredible in battle.
He's like a male Mary Sue.
A little bit.
Like a little, like tiny little bit.
A little bit.
Tiny, like, I mean, Mary Sue is a nonsense term which is just used by incels to slander female characters. But if one were to call any character in this book a Mary Sue,
what is his character arc? It's kind of just learning to like stand up for himself and be confident in who he is. If he has a flaw, it's that at the beginning he's like, well, I'm just going to sneak off and do my training in the woods and stuff, but I won't try to change anything on a greater level. He doesn't do that until it becomes a necessity. He's very much like passive. I'd say it's arguably that to begin with, which is a bit difficult, because then once he starts doing things, that sort of character arc is kind of over, and then he doesn't really, he just has to keep doing things.
Maybe there is a certain level of I believe Lucy Holland is cis, and apparently cis author, writing a very amazing trans character, but not wanting to make them problematic.
To be fair, we do have Murden/Maury to be problematic.
This is true.
Yeah, I would say that actually out of the main three, he was probably the least interesting to me. Like, he just, like, okay, he was getting in touch with his magic and stuff, and that was fun. Yeah, I mean, like, I really enjoyed his points of view. You know, when you have those split point of view books, and then you get that character that you just do not care about, and you're like, God, can I just skip you? Like, can't we go back to someone who, with these three, I was like, no, I want to hear from all of you, which was nice.
I definitely think on my first read, I was very much like, Constantine, favourite character, obsessed. Like, I was reading it for him. And then on my second read, I was reading it for Cena.
I did enjoy Reva's point of view as well, but like I did get a little bit, I would say she was the only one where sometimes I was a bit exhausted with the whole Tristan stuff.
Yeah.
They weren't very compelling to me as a relationship. Like, I wasn't that invested in whether or not he was lying, and
it was so frustrating because it was so obvious that he was lying, and she'd very much had her blinders on.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the bittersweet endings that all three of the siblings get. Like, in very, very different degrees.
I was about to say.
But no one gets a happy ending, and no one gets, like, completely dead.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we don't really know much about Reva's ending. That's, like, the one that's left the most ambiguous, because she just sort of rides off with Tristan, and then that's kind of all that you hear of it.
We know from the epilogue, Dumnonia was overrun and conquered, and, like, the fact that Reva... yeah, she's postponing the conquering, but in siring a Saxon son, she is giving the Saxons a blood tie to Domnonia. So there's all these little bittersweet bits. Like, yeah, we've won for now, but
it's interesting because it is that thing of like, well, it did still matter, and I think Holland gets that across very well. That it doesn't feel like a pointless narrative for that reason, because you're so invested in each character on an individual level that the wider scale conflict is almost not relevant. I mean, it is relevant, but it's not the point.
Yeah.
So Morgan, how did you rate Sistersong?
I rated it a 5 out of 5 because it was one of my top 10 books of 2021. It is just a great read. My first foray into historical fantasy, and I usually find when you're experiencing a new genre, it can be very hit or miss. And I think it was a hit.
I would also give Sistersong a 5 out of 5.
Oh my gosh!
Are you surprised?
Yeah, you
very
rarely give out 5s. This is very exciting.
I just had a really good time. Like, I just haven't read like a fantasy that grabbed me so much in such a long time and like had me so invested and like so swept away, basically. So Morgan, do you have any recommendations for those who enjoyed Sistersong?
Okay, this is really rogue, really out there, but I'm going to recommend Kith and Kin by Marieke Nijkamp, because is it historical fantasy? No. Is it high fantasy with a historical fantasy vibe? Yes. Is it diverse fantasy? Yes. Does it have that same sort of vibe of innovation versus magic versus corruption versus the poorest of society versus the richest of society? Yes.
Does it revolve around sibling relationships?
Sibling relationships, again, very important. Siblings who end up on different sides of a conflict. My second recommendation, I mean, we are in the age of retellings, so whilst I can't necessarily recommend any other Celtic retellings, I can offer some feminist Greek myth retellings. What I would say has the most vibes like this would be Daughters of Sparta by Claire Heywood, which is more focused on that courtly drama because it's about Helen and about Clytemnestra and how they sort of cope with courtly life in very different ways as women, which I think parallels Reva and Sina quite similarly. Do you have any recommendations?
I do. I have 2 recommendations, in fact.
Oh, damn.
I have Savage Her Reply by Deidre Sullivan, which is another retelling. It's a retelling of The Children of Lear. If you don't know the story of The Children of Lear, it's about a witch who marries a king called Lear and then turns all of his previous children into swans. This is from the point of view of the witch, so you see her motivations. I think it's interesting as a feminist piece of literature as well. It has a very similar feel to it, I think, and it also has a sister relationship that's like at the heart of it. And then my other recommendation is A Skinful of Shadows by Frances Hardinge, which is also historical fiction, also revolves around religion somewhat. If when Sina got turned into a bone harp, you were like, this is up my alley, give me more of this absolutely disturbing, borderline horror, historical fantasy stuff, then I think you should read A Skinful of Shadows. Thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed this, join us in 2 weeks for A Marvellous Light by Freya, which I'm making Morgan read as the next historical fantasy book.
And until then, you're always welcome through the bookcase.
Don't forget to scratch the cat on your way out. Thank you for listening to The Hidden Bookcase, a production of Plain Up Prod. On this episode, you heard Morgan Greensmith and Soren Briarwood discussing Sistersong by Lucy Holland. You can find out more about this book at lucyhounslow.co.uk, and you can follow Holland at Sylvan Historian on Twitter. You can find The Hidden Bookcase on Twitter at Hidden Bookcase, and on Instagram, Facebook, Tumblr, and TikTok at Hidden Bookcase Podcast. Find out more about Plain Up Prod at plainupprod.com. Know what we should read next, or want to chat to us about what you thought of this episode's read? You can reach us at thehiddenbookcase@gmail.com or send us a DM on social media. We'd love to hear from you. If you're enjoying The Hidden Bookcase, please consider leaving us a rating or review, or you can always tell a friend how to find us. Your whispers are the best way for bookworms to discover our show. On our next episode, which will be out on Monday, 18th of July, we'll be discussing A Marvellous Light by Freya. We hope to see you then, and in the meantime, you're always welcome through the bookcase.